Greetings and hello, everyone. My name is Don Taylor, and welcome to the Middle Grades Collaborative Conversation. This is our fourth conversation of the school year, and our work is sponsored by the Middle Grades Collaborative and the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education, and also in partnership with Up for Learning. Today, I'm excited. We have a guest, Noelle Williams, who's going to talk to us about her experience as an activist and a student both in the Montpelier Public Schools and the University of Vermont. But before we begin that discussion, if we could have our panelists introduce themselves, that'd be great.
Hi, I'm Maura Wheeler. I'm the Proficiency-Based Learning and Technology Integration Coach at Noelle South.
Hi, I'm Sarah Popowitz, and I am a Program Director with Up for Learning.
Hi, I'm Noelle Williams, and I am a senior at University of Vermont.
Hi, Meg. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Apologies for being late. I'm Meg O'Donnell. I teach humanities to 7th and 8th graders at Shelburne Community School.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And again, I want to welcome Noelle. I've seen her work firsthand as an educator in Montpelier. I've seen her activism, and she's graciously agreed to just answer some questions about her work as an activist and fighting for anti-racism efforts in schools around Vermont. And Noelle, I'm going to start just with some questions, and then if folks want to chime in, feel free to do that. In doing some research on your background in a 2021 article in Vermont Digger, you described different experiences in your youth that started you on the path to being an activist. Can you talk a little bit about what role schools played in those experiences, or how school was reflected in those experiences?
Yeah, definitely. So I went to Montpelier Elementary School as in elementary school, and I remember going through microaggressions and experiences where I felt like kids didn't know that they were what they were saying or what they were doing. I remember this one time I was in line, and I'm like Ghanaian, and so we cook Ghanaian food at home, and I smelled probably different than the other kids at that age. And I don't think kids understood how to talk about, people might cook different foods in different households, and those foods might smell differently. So I remember that being like the first difference that set me apart from other kids. And I think the school district tried their best to deal with that situation. I remember I went home really upset and crying, and my parents weren't very happy about that. So they brought it to the school. And from that, I think they created more of a lunch group for kids of color, so they could sit and eat with each other and be in community. And I remember my cousin being in that group. So that felt nice. It felt a little hard to be like it wasn't every day. I think it was once a week, which was nice to have the option of sitting with my other friends at lunch as well. And then I went to middle school at the Barrytown district, and there was another incident with my hair. And I recently did a big chop, which is, I think, really liberating for me as a Black woman. And so I was on the bus one day, and kids were touching my braids. And I think also having that conversation of different hairstyles are seen, and how to respect other people's bodies, and that we don't really touch other kids' hair, no matter if you're Black or not, would be a good lesson from that story. But I think going into high school, a lot of the learning came from curriculum based, noticing that what I was taught wasn't necessarily diverse or incorporated subjects that maybe I wanted to learn about or I wanted to experience. So I think from high school really came my drive to make a change, both in curriculum but also within society.
So Noelle, when you're thinking of, if you're reflecting back as a student and you talk about this drive, is there something that allowed you to do that, or an opportunity? Our audience is other middle school teachers and other educators. And what would you when I hear you saying in the earlier years about teaching just respect for different foods, respect for different clothing, respect for, our bodies and not touching. And, that seems very age appropriate.
Yeah.
And then is there an opportunity that a teacher presented to you or was presented to you by the school that helped you find that voice?
I wouldn't say there was any like one opportunity. I think that my like cousin Joellen, she inspired me to find my voice, and having her in my community was really helpful. And I think to create the Racial Justice Alliance, there was a social worker at our school, Mary Ellen Solon, who really was there just to listen. And I remember there was an incident with we had a school assembly, and a like Black, his name was John, something with a J. I forgot his name, but he came to present at our school, and it was like the first Black poet, man, like any teacher that we had in our years of schooling. So my cousin and I were really excited to go see that presentation. And the incident happened where a person wasn't being respectful, and that really hurt her feelings. And so she went to the social worker to talk about that. And out of that conversation came the club, the RJA, the Racial Justice Alliance, which led to more change throughout high school. So I think just having a listening ear and someone there to like support you was really helpful in that moment. And from there really stemmed more steps to create the change we wanted to create.
And one thing I've heard you mention just a couple of times is this idea of a community, like having that person in my community.
Yeah.
And when you talk about, I think you're talking about community in a little bit different way than I've thought about it. Like maybe an affinity group or a small group of folks. And can you talk more about how you created that community, or how that community places that it was able to gather within the school?
Yeah. So it was mainly just within the Racial Justice Alliance, because it was a little bit in sports. Like Joelle and I were really the only like Black women within our grade. But it was nice to have students of all grades come together as one with the Racial Justice Alliance. And within classes, it felt a little bit isolating because we were always in the same classes. So the Racial Justice Alliance was really the place like to meet once a week to kind of talk about issues that were happening and to like brainstorm ideas to change.
Thank you. Does anybody have other questions they want to ask? If you do, you can put them in the chat. And Noelle, I really appreciate this, because as you're talking, I'm thinking about spaces and things that I do in my own practice and how I can be more open to some of the opportunities that you're describing. And you talk about the Racial Justice Alliance. Can you just maybe take me through a little bit of a timeline? So an incident happened, you had an adult, an advocate, and then how did you go from this idea or this incident through to the formation of the group, and what was that like?
Yeah, I guess we feel really lucky at Montpelier High School that you're able to create clubs, and the students are able to kind of take the lead on which club you want to create. And all you need is an advisor. So if you have an advisor to advise your club, you're able to move forward in that process easily. So we had Mary Ellen Solon, who was able to be our advisor, and then we just spread the word to our student body. And there was like a fair, like a club fair that we had gone to tell our student body that this is what we're doing, and we are happy to have people of color come join our club. And from there it was really quickly, like the idea of raising the flag came pretty soon after that, because UVM had done it, and we had heard that UVM, the University of Vermont, had raised their flag. And then I had a meeting with my poet advisor, and you might know her, Miss McCadden. Yep. And I was talking to her about, Miss McCadden, I think UVM had done this really cool thing. Do you think we could do it here? And she just was like, yes. And I feel like that was also the push I need. I think if she would have been like, no, I don't know about that, or like kind of reserved, I probably would have been like, oh, you're right. But she was really supportive and said, yeah, like, I think you should talk to our principal at the time was Dr. McRae. So we talked to him and he was really like excited for what we wanted to do. And it wasn't up to him, it was up to the superintendent. So we went to him and he had more reservations about the idea, but we went farther and went to the school board. And having parents on the school board was really helpful because some of those parents had kids of color, and they understood like why it was so important to advocate for Black lives.
This is awesome. Like, just I'm kind of going back, and I've kind of gotten bits and pieces of it through sort of the history of Montpelier, but hearing the process is amazing. And I have to ask, when you were doing the Racial Justice Alliance, and what year in high school were you when that was just starting?
We were sophomores, yeah. So we
So
were young.
You're a sophomore in high school, you're trying to get this group off the ground. Were there obstacles or challenges in your way that you remember overcoming, or were there students who were not as receptive to the community you were trying to create as you would hope?
Yeah. There were more, I don't think there were any teachers necessarily that had a like problem what we were doing, but there were definitely students that didn't believe that we should be talking about Black lives in school. And I remember the flag raising, you weren't made to come out and do that, but most kids did come out and a few kids stayed. And it was nice to have a conversation because we had tabled the day before saying like, you should come out and come support us. And some kids stopped to have a conversation with us about why they thought they wouldn't. So I was thankful for that conversation. So I think it's good to hear both sides. It's good to break down why people think that Black lives don't matter. So I think it gave a chance for a deeper conversation that needed to be had.
And the raising the Black lives, Meg, go ahead.
Oh, I was just wondering if, Noelle, thank you so much for sharing this. It's got my wheels turning about wanting to start back up our diversity and inclusion group with kids. It was put on hold last year because of COVID, and things have fallen off the radar a little bit this year. And so just trying to get things back on track. And I guess I was wondering if any of those conversations that you were having specifically related to that found their way into the classroom. Like, did you find that there were teachers that were bringing it up in, as part of the curriculum or as part of a current event or whatever, however it came up?
Yes. So we had a few asks while I was went to the school board, and one of our asks was that the curriculum would be more thought about and inclusive with not just Black lives but everybody. And so I think teachers did take that into consideration. I noticed that even after I left, some of the books that kids were reading were more diverse, and I think they've been trying to have a little bit more speakers come in with diverse backgrounds. So I think the curriculum is changing a little bit more.
Sarah, do you have a question?
Thanks for sharing your story. And I'm really curious, like the minute you said the conversations, dialogue and youth dialogue amongst themselves, youth and adult dialogue is definitely something that's at the forefront of our work with schools. And so I'm always really curious, as there's ways that we can really scaffold and set up and help direct and help facilitate dialogue happening in a classroom. And then there's just natural dialogue that just happens. And so I'm so curious if you could maybe just share a little bit more. How did that interaction happen between, you said, maybe the youth who didn't come outside and weren't supportive? Was that just like hallway conversation? Was that a really structured dialogue that was set up to have those conversations? Because I feel like even just within what's happened in some Vermont schools in particular within the last couple of weeks with flags, with it's becoming more and more a critical component that just has to be happening. So I'm just curious what that looked like for you.
Yeah. So the particular conversation with a guy we had was just in the hallway in passing. And I think a lot of people, middle school, high school, you don't do better until you know better. And so you can't do better until you know like how to do better. And I think a lot of people just kind of take, and I get it, like, your parents are who raise you and they love you. And so you take a lot of what they say and their values and hopes and dreams as, truth and fact. So it seemed like a lot more of that situation where like my parents say this is right. And so I think it's right. And for me, my parents are like Ghanaian and they don't really know what like racism is like because in Ghana, everybody's Black. And so it wasn't, like, a lot of the Black Lives Matter didn't come from my parents because they hadn't experienced that. It like really truly came from me and my experiences being raised here.
Thank you again. I guess another question that I have, and this is sort of related to your experience, when we're walking into classrooms either in Montpelier or at the University of Vermont, what do you notice? And for example, when you talked about the books and the speakers and maybe the media that's featured, is that something that this is probably pretty obvious, but do you recognize that right away when you look at classroom libraries or you look at what's on the wall? And how does that, or did that impact you as a student?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that I noticed, like just pictures on the wall or who the speakers that came into our school were, or even like lessons that we were taught. I remember especially like we talked about feminism and a lot of the unit was about like white women. And I was like, there's some pretty awesome Black women out there who are doing great things. So I think I noticed it, and I think we all would notice it more. And I think we're so used to seeing like the white face or the white picture that like seeing that like diversity would mean a lot more.
Yeah, that's really powerful, and I'm also thinking about, did you ever say anything about it? And then my question is, why should a kid have to say anything about their learning environment, right? It should be open and obvious that we're supporting all kids in our classrooms. Yeah. And when even the simplest things like what's on the wall, if we're not paying attention to that, we're having a major impact on students and kids who may not, who's going to say or bring that up, right? And I guess that leads to the next question is, as you've gone through from the Racial Justice Alliance, I know you were a really big part of the Black Lives Matter in Montpelier. What are some of the skills that you've had to develop? You mentioned talking to parent groups and talking to teachers. And can you just maybe note some of the most important skills that you've had to develop to continue to be such an articulate advocate for your causes?
Yeah. I think I've gotten a lot better at like public speaking. I don't really like it very much, but I've gotten better at it. I've gotten more confident in myself and what I'm capable of in that sense. I also feel like my teamwork is a lot better. I have worked with people of all ages now and all backgrounds, and it feels really nice to feel like I can work well with people. I also think just like writing skills, like I have had to write some speeches and I've had to write some talks. Yeah, I think there's a lot of skills, communication, advertising, and like media skills. I helped out with the RJA after I graduated. During COVID, I was able to be their advisor, so it felt really nice to give back to that club after I'd graduated from high school. So I think there's a lot of skills.
And then, go ahead, Maura.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here on exam week of your senior year. It's amazing. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm so curious about sort of two parts. One is, what advice do you have to other youth who are really looking to get involved in activism? And then the second is sort of what would be your advice to teachers about how to support youth who come to them really seeking to advocate for causes? Like, what are the conditions that we can help to create in the classroom?
Yeah, I think for students, I think it's important to have, RJAs, and also within the RJA, I think affinity groups for just BIPOC kids, because it could be a lot of work, and sometimes you don't want to maybe say like a situation that came up in front of your white friends who maybe didn't say anything that day to like defend you or help you out. So I think it's important to have everybody, like the RJA, which was everybody, but also if affinity space for BIPOC kids to just say how they're feeling. And I mean, particularly we would want a staff of color to like run that group, but I know that's not always possible in Vermont. So I think that would be really helpful for students, just to get into groups. And I think a lot of time, a lot of like activism groups or like social justice groups, there's a lot of emphasis on like change and work. And I think there's a good balance between having fun and building community and also doing the work, because the work is hard and it can be really stressful and like a lot of stress. So I think it's good to have the balance of both. I remember we went bowling as a club together and had movie nights once a month, and there were educational movies, but there were also movies that just were like a bonding moment. So I think there's a good balance between both. And I think for teachers, I think every student gravitates towards at least one teacher. Like I remember my Spanish teacher was definitely the person that I always went to talk about things. So I think teachers really like just knowing that they really do make the impact for their students, and that even if they don't tell you, like you really are making the impact. And knowing that like sometimes a listening ear is just like what is needed, and advice, like impact versus intent. Like you might intent for something to be said some way, but the impact was just either right or wrong. Oh yeah, and I think just if a student like really confides in you, just to have that trust that there is something you can do, like teachers make a really big impact as well.
Thank you. So, and I guess a question that I have is, so you've been in Montpelier schools. I have some classes where I have, not everybody's white. I have, there's kids of different color and race. And it's hard to like, do you acknowledge that? I don't want to put kids, on the spot, but I'm so aware of maybe what they're going through. And how do you, like, what's your advice on how teachers should maybe acknowledge some of the things that the unique circumstances that those kids are dealing with in school, and while at the same time not making the mistakes? I think a lot of teachers are afraid of making mistakes or saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, so this semester I actually had an anti-racism and health class, and I was one of two students of color. And we talked a lot about race and a lot about health and race. And I felt that my professor did a really good job of like pushing me to maybe speak up a little bit, but also like letting me like say what I want, or like sit through class and not say anything. Or like having like private conversations with me about what I thought about this or that. And I think in high school I would have probably appreciated more like of those private conversations, asking whether this like you would want to talk about this, or asking if this would be helpful, or because I don't know, I think being on the spot is hard, but feeling like your teacher cares to like ask you or have that private conversation was helpful.
Right. And I mean, so as you're talking, I'm thinking, this is so important. If you're planning things in your curriculum, you should be able to start looking at, okay, what's something that I would want to confer with students who it might impact in a different way. And
Yeah.
that should maybe become part of the work that we're doing sort of on a regular basis, so that we don't do, the ask in class, right? Instead, we've laid the groundwork and the foundation for that, so that everybody's on board.
Yeah, and if there's anything they would like to know or learn about, as a middle schooler, I think we all have hopes and dreams and ideas of things to learn about, and if there's anything they were really curious about, would be also a good ask. Yeah.
Awesome. So you've mentioned a couple, I know in my conversations with you, you've mentioned the work that you're doing at UVM, and you just mentioned an anti-racism and health class. And I'm just wondering how the work, if you could talk about how the work with the Racial Justice Alliance and Black Lives Matter, how that has led to where you are now, and what you're studying, and how your experiences kind of as a whole are shaping some of the directions that you're taking now.
Yeah. So I am studying health sciences, and I wanted to be a pediatrician when I first came to college. But after learning all about like inequities of health, I really thought about the importance of preventative medicine instead of treatment. And so I'm switching kind of my course into starting my master's of public health next semester. And I just want to be able to work on the ground in more communities of color, to help prevent disease and prevent sickness. So that's my hope. But I think it's really like reflected in my Black Lives Matter work. I know that like everything affects Black people more drastically, like environmental issues, housing, poverty. And so I think that love and drive of activism has gone into my health work and my healthcare ideas.
That's awesome. Some of this, the way that you've kind of those stepping stones and how it's ended up, those are awesome. I guess if you were to look back on your experiences and point to, some pieces or times that really mattered, or where you wish the school maybe had done something different, are there specific moments when you can look back and say, hey, this is a place where, schools, as many of us are in the schools and, working with these middle level kids, this is a place where you should really focus because it makes a huge difference, based on your experience and with the education you have now and all of your activism. If you were to look back in hindsight, what would you recommend for us?
Yeah, I think schools are not really there with I guess punishment with like acts of racism or acts of violence against kids. I think it's hard to feel like, especially with kids whose parents might not care or agree with their actions, it's probably hard to discipline in that manner. But I remember like incidents with my brother. He was on the basketball team, and a guy had called him a Kaffir boy, which is pretty much the N word for in South African culture. And so there wasn't very much done about that. And I think there has to be a better way of talking about race and racism in the more disciplinary factor of it.
So just kind of, what you're seeing is that the systemic reaction or the systemic response to these acts of racism is something that doesn't leave you feeling protected or cared for.
Yeah.
That's hard to hear. Unfortunately, I've been asking some of my own students about this, and I've been asking about the language and the incidents, and it goes back much earlier than I even suspected. And so again, when we talk about age appropriate conversations and activities that can support anti-racism, I think we maybe even need to go earlier in the younger ages.
Yeah.
And that's disappointing to hear from you, that as a student and a person, a female student in the Montpelier school system, and you're seeing these incidents that are hitting home and then feeling like you're not protected. I'm sorry to hear that. Do folks have other questions for Noelle? You bring such a wide range of experiences here. It's amazing. And I'm really thankful that you're willing to share these. And I guess moving forward, when you talk about health and you talk about communities, you also, I think you mentioned about advocates, student advocates, like friends. Like you said, there were, when a friend didn't defend you or didn't come step up. And do you feel like that's something that should also be being taught or being talked about? Is that sort of that upstander or, friends who defend type?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the movement with like bullying. I think a lot of kids are being told that you can make an impact in stopping someone's bullying, and not being a bystander and just saying, like, even asking like a bully or someone who had said a racial slur, like, why did you say that? Like questioning their actions. And if they hadn't, if they have nothing to say, it's really clear that there might be some more like knowledge and education based interventions than maybe just being a hurtful person. Um, so I think mentorship is also like so important. I remember I mentored in high school and I was able to mentor Esther Lean, who was also a Black little girl in the school system. And so I wanted to be better for her, and I was really inspired to like mentor her and also see that she was in the RJA when she went to high school. And I mentor kids in Dream, which is a program at UVM now, and that feels really nice.
Meg?
Yes, thanks, Don. Noelle, I was wondering about, so it's come up at our school. I teach at Shelburne Community School, and our district has raised the Black Lives Matter flag, and we have it at our school. It's raised, and yet it's come up from both our parent diversity and inclusion group and our teacher diversity inclusion group, is how do we make the power of that flag flying feel still present. It just feels like sometimes like we did it and we have, our Black Lives Matter posters. We talk about like it's in my curriculum when we talk about identity and we talk about race, but I missed the mark in not referencing back to the power of having the flag flown. And I just wondered if you had any ideas or thoughts about ways that schools can authentically honor that significance.
Yeah. I think it's within the curriculum mainly, is like coming back to learning about it day by day and in different ways, and not just like maybe through PowerPoints or homework, but in fun ways as well. Yeah, I think it's really in the curriculum. And I think you even see it in like sports, how Winooski boys were treated. And that shows a whole nother reason why the flag should be up, because it's really right here in our state.
Unfortunately, as you mentioned, there have been, a bunch of incidents recently that demonstrate clearly how we need to continue to push these issues and talk about them in the classroom. We're almost at the end here, and I was just thinking that when I was a senior in college, I was not doing what you're doing. I was not answering panel questions, and I just, again, thank you very much. But I wonder, do you have any questions for us as teachers and educators? Yeah.
Well, I know that my professor in a different class had brought up that in, I think, New Hampshire, they're passing a law that says teachers can't talk about certain things or can't talk about critical race theory. And I think Vermont should do the opposite. I think they should create a law that states that you can, and not just critical race theory, but teachers can talk about what they want to talk about in their classrooms. And I think that's kind of scary that if that's the direction we're going, teachers are going to be a lot more limited in what they're able to share in their classrooms. And I guess I wonder if there's maybe ideas around turning that law upside down in Vermont.
Maura?
I can start, but Sarah, jump in. I would say that's such a good question. And I think we have a lot of Vermont educators who are sort of bracing for that. And we have people coming to board meetings, saying that we shouldn't be teaching critical race theory in schools and things like that. I would say in Vermont, we're in a unique context because we do have policies and model policies that really support teachers teaching around equity and racial justice specifically, and really outlining that. And we also have, I believe it's House Bill 2. Is that correct, Sarah? It's an ethnic studies bill that was passed that's developing some standards that are then also being aligned with the standards for educators. So over the next couple of years, it will be sort of really explicit that teachers are expected to talk about racial and social justice in their classrooms, and ethnic studies, which is, I think, an attempt to build a system to ensure that these conversations are happening. And, I think it's still a small step, right? There's so many other things that we need to do, but I think watching what's happening around the country, there are people definitely sort of on the edges of their seats wondering what's going to happen here. And there's, it is tense in many communities right now about navigating those conversations. But that's such a good question. And I think it's coming up all over the place. Yeah. Sarah, do you want to jump in?
I was just going to say, I'm actually working with a principal in New Hampshire currently, and within our project work, our scope of our work for the year, at the very beginning, when I outlined the work we would be doing, he said, "Oh, by the way, we can't use the word equity in school." Yeah. And I was like, legally, they can't say it. And it just kind of, mind blown. And so we delved into a lot of conversations. It's been brought into a lot of our work here. So everything you were just saying around how can Vermont sort of flip the switch on that? And I think that one of the, I'll bring it back to dialogue and confidence in dialogue for youth and adults. When there's confidence in language and knowledge, and it's like a skill to be able to have these conversations confidently. And when more teachers have the skills and confidence to have the conversations, and, like everyone was saying, not shying away because you feel like you might say something wrong. And so, I think that is a step in beginning to challenge this system and be ready. Right? Be ready if and when that ever comes to that in Vermont, that we will have a collective power of youth and adults ready with the strong language and background to fight the fight. And so I think that's the work you're doing clearly, which is amazing. I think that's the work that, collectively we're all trying to do. But I think in the end, it's going to be not only the passion, but having the skills and the language to make it happen.
Yeah, I think also in my health class, we read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Kendi. And I think more and more of the curriculum should be based on policies. And I think that's where that's the facts, certain policies that make things harder for Black people, starting way before slavery. So I think having that conversation rather than a you and I or person to person, putting it more into the policy level, and how these policies in life is just harder for Black folks because of these policies, and because of the not all people in power, but some people in power who make money off these policies, or make their livelihood from certain people not, having healthcare or stuff like that.
No, one interesting thing that sort of ties into what you were saying about policy, but also I work with Sarah, created a new sustainability class here. And I think about a month and a half ago, we were reflecting on some of the racial issues that continue to crop up. And we were talking about what is really a sustainable community. And when I first took the program, I was thinking, sustainable foods and power, electricity. But in reality, what does it mean to be a sustainable community, right? And what do you need to have? And you need to have, everybody has the same rights. You need to have social justice. You need to have policies that protect everybody, whether it's access to healthcare, access to education, access to good food, access to, meaningful jobs. And I think that that's been something that it's a little bit of a new perspective for me. But then when I hear you talking about the healthcare and anti-racism, and we don't always think about racism in terms of these other pieces, right? Of housing, of jobs, of schools. And so I think that's something that I'm trying to think about quite a bit is, what does it mean to be a sustainable community, and have kids thinking about that too. And then the other piece, Sarah talks a lot about the dialogue is, what are the skills, like the skills that you've had to build through hard work of public speaking, of advocacy, of standing up for what you believe in, and then articulating that to all these groups in power. How do we integrate that into our school so that, as Sarah mentioned, the kids have when something comes up that they are passionate about or they want to advocate for, they already have those skills, and they're not just, victimized by the people who are in power. So I think those are all ways that, people are looking at it and working, hopefully, towards a more just and equitable future. Does anybody have any last questions? Or Noelle, do you have any last questions?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I'm so happy to talk to you all.
Well, again, thank you very much. We are the Middle Grades Collaborative. We get together every month for these conversations. And in a lot of ways, we've been talking this year in the challenge of the pandemic and in the challenge of some of the social fluctuations, how important it is to gather and to talk and to think about these different issues as they come up. Our next conversation is January 20th. That'll be a Thursday. And then we also have the Middle Grades Conference is happening on January 29th. That's going to be online, and all are open to attend that. And that's featuring Alex Chevron-Vanette, who is speaking about trauma-informed education. Some of these issues will come up then as well. Meg, could you hold that up again? That's Alex's book, Equity-Centered Trauma-Informed Education. So she'll be the keynote speaker, and hopefully we can have a lot of people gathering there and talking and, discussing some of these issues. And just finally, Noelle, thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate it. If you do have that last exam, good luck. Good luck with the end of your semester. I hope you enjoy the holidays, and give my best to Leo and Ronnie and the rest of your family. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, if you have any other questions, send them my way.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful holiday. Take care. Bye now.